Hello guys, and you're welcome. In our last lesson, we saw how we could work with the custom plots, and we saw how we could create the facet grids, and we had these different kind of plots, multiple plots on axes. This time around, let's go ahead and look at the regression plots. Now, regression is a statistical technique that is used to show a relationship between one dependent variable and a series of other independent variables. And usually a straight line will visually depict the relationship between these two variables. Now, we're not going to go deeply into regression right now, so let's go ahead and just see how we can use that in Python. So as usual, I'll just create my imports. So I'll just do the matplotlib inline. I'm going to import numpy as the alias np. Let's import seaborn as SNS. And this time around, I'll just run this, and I'm going to load the penguins dataset. So I'm just going to say penguins equals SNS dot load underscore dataset, and I'll pass in penguins. And to see our dataset, we could just simply type the name of that dataset, and we can see that output showing us quickly. So we'll use the regplot, which is the function that is used to plot regressions. And to do that, we're just going to say sns.regplot, and then within this, we'll pass in the penguins data. And for our x-axis, let's use the bill underscore length underscore mm, just like that. And we also need to pass in a y-axis, so I'll just pass in the bill underscore depth underscore mm, and let's just go ahead and run this. So you can see we have this regression line, and it shows the scatter plots for these two properties. So the variables we use are the bill depth, millimeters, and then the bill length. So let's go ahead and see how we can customize this to actually get more output. We can use a confidence interval to specify an error margin. So we can use that using the CI. So we can just go ahead right here, and I'll say comma. I'll just pass CI and set this to 50%. For our confidence interval, and we can actually see that line kind of dimmed out a bit. What we can also do is to actually set a log value to see our logarithmic value. So right here, I can just say log x, and I'll just set this to true, which is a Boolean value, and we should see that result also. It also depends on the kind of chart we're working on. What we can also do is to actually change our markers. Let's go ahead and set a marker, and I'll just set this to the plus symbol, and I'll not forget, let me just pass in the comma, and if you run this, we can actually see our markers change. So that's one of the cute and unique things about the regression plot. You can simply compare two dependent and independent variables, and then see that line of best fit, and we can slightly see that curve on this line that shows us the log x value is actually working. So that's super great. So we can actually use the LM plot to combine a regression model with the facet grid we learned in our last lesson. So let's go ahead and see the LM plot, and to do that, I'm going to be using the iris dataset. So I'll just say iris is equals to sns.load underscore dataset, and I'll pass in the iris dataset. The iris dataset contains information regarding the sepal and length and width of some particular plant species. So let's run that and just quickly look at iris.head, so we can just look at the dataset, and these are the parameter values we get for our iris dataset. So let's go ahead and quickly see how we can use the LM plot. So to use that, I'm just going to say sns dot lm plot, just like that, and we'll pass in our data, which is the iris data. And for my x, I'm just going to use the sepal length, sepal underscore length, and then for the y value, I'm going to say sepal underscore width. And let's go ahead and run that. So we can actually see we have our regression plot. We can pass a hue, and this will plot a separate grid with a plot and a new regression. So let's go ahead and see, use a hue, and for the hue we'll pass in the species. So I'm just going to say comma hue is going to be equal to the species, and let's just go ahead and set a color palette. So I'll just say palette equals SNS dot color palette, and I'll just set a turbo underscore R. So I'll use the reversed value for the turbo. So you can see we have these two plots side by side, separated by the hue that contains also the species. So that's actually a great and important way to work on this. What we can do is to actually customize this by setting a height value and an aspect value to change how our results are being displayed. So I can go ahead and set a height, let's say to a value of 4, and let's also set our aspect to say 1. And let's just go ahead and run this. So you can actually, we have that one aspect that actually shrinks this image output, so we can actually see what results we get. So another thing I like to quickly point out is that the LM plot will plot, regplot regression models with the regplot, and facet grid is an axis level function. So the LM plot is a figure level, while the regplot is an axis level function. So thank you very much, guys. That'll be a quick one on regression plots. We're not going to go really deep into regression, but just know that Seaborn has some functions that quickly let you see regression values. You can set a confidence interval and a logarithmic value, and you can clearly see the regression lines and the results. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next lesson.